Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, October 22nd, 2021. Got that out correctly. I don't know. It seemed like a tongue twister at the time. Lots to catch up on today. It is a Friday, so we have the decks cleared to take care of it. Not that I love having it that way. Would love to have cooperation of, someone. I'll draft someone to do the first hour of the show. It's been a long week, and we had an empty slate yesterday with Greg out due to home maintenance issues. You know, this happens from time to time. We like it better when he's getting a new fun thing installed than when he's cleaning up the mess of an old thing breaking. But, fingers crossed that everything went well yesterday. It seemed to be under control. Just had to clean up some stuff, lost track of time, so we missed him yesterday. But we'll get him back for the Monday show. And he was, I think he was able to put up a morning roundup, abbreviated pundit roundup this morning anyway, so we can lean on him just the same. And that's almost as valuable as actually having him here to talk to. And I banked that for our glance over there this morning. There's plenty of news. There's a lot of long-form things that I thought it would be interesting to catch up on. We'll see how we put this sort of free-form Friday thing together. It's a very radio-ish day. I just want to mention for the record, because I'm old and I thought you would think it was funny too. Where did I see this thing today? Somebody, I picked up on this thread that we'll discuss in just a minute, just for fun, for a totally different reason. But here we go. Yes, I happened to catch today, I think I saw Molly Jung Fast retweeting with a comment on a Maggie Haberman comment about John Eastman, who's back in the news. And I guess Eastman's back in the news these days because he's trying to distance himself from his own memo. You remember the memo suggesting that Mike Pence could be convinced that the Electoral Count Act could be manipulated in such a way that they could engineer a second term in the presidency for Donald Trump. That's basically what it came down to. And you may recall that in all the outrage, I actually went on the show and said, well, it would have been outrageous and I would have been angry about it, but I'm not entirely convinced that John Eastman has done something terrible here. He's basically pushed the boundaries of congressional prerogatives in making their own rules and used the ambiguity in the Electoral Count Act to try to engineer a solution that there might not be any coming back from, that you might just be able to say, well, this was left to Congress, and Congress may or may not have misinterpreted it, but I don't think we can find a way for the courts to insert themselves in this situation, and what has been done is done. And as bad as it might make us all feel, we've done the deed here, and the constitutional system contemplates occasionally making wrong or embarrassing decisions with the power that the various branches have been delegated, but that's the way it falls. And anyway, I'll talk about a little bit more about why that's interesting to me personally a little bit later. What I thought was interesting and fun was, here's Haberman's tweet. Eastman said a lot of this publicly. Now he's trying to undo it, trying to back away from his memo. Also, interestingly, she's reacting to a tweet about a new piece, I guess that discusses all of this in the National Review. So anyway, that comes up later, the interesting part about National Review and the people who are reacting to it. But one of the responses to Maggie Haberman's tweet here comes from, I don't know who Lewis is here. He doesn't identify himself in his profile. But he says, Eastman's Kodak moments are indelibly captured in black and white. How very retro and reprehensible. That is to say that he was basically, he's caught on record by his Kodak moments per se. As the author of the memo, and he was spent plenty of time in front of right-wing media anyway, defending the memo before everyone knew how they were supposed to feel it was so crazy and outrageous. But there's like a lot of, it's one response to it, from one tweeter saying, I suspect only boomers will appreciate your nuanced pun. And it appears to be a lot of reaction around it. Like, I don't get it. Why is that funny? His name is Eastman. You said something about Kodak. Why is that hilarious? So I just wanted to make you feel extremely old or extremely young and knowledgeable if you also got the joke and are under, 40 something years old. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. And, maybe a better opening, funny, light thing than the other discussion that tweet prompted. Anyway, the Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is what you're hearing. In case you woke up and heard voices in your head and weren't sure what was happening, we'll pause for station identification. It's the Kagro in the Morning show on Netroots Radio. There, station identified. Very good. Moving on. Bill was tweeting this morning. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Seems we just got started, and before you know it, comes the time we have to say, so long. And Kagro X tugs earlobe. And it sort of feels that way, especially on a Friday when I realize, okay, I can't just follow up tomorrow. So I guess we better get to the stories or else I'll start feeling bad about the things I couldn't fit in the show. Every morning the show starts and I say, how am I going to get through 2 hours? And at the end of every show, I'm scrambling to try and fit something in. And there I am. We can move back to the John Eastman thing because there's Dave Weigel retweeting Maggie Haberman's tweet. This is as good a place to start on it as any. Haberman tweeting, all right, Eastman said a lot of this publicly, now he's trying to undo it. Referring to the tweet of John McCormick, Washington correspondent for the National Review, tweeting around this note, that new at National Review Online, NRO, John Eastman versus the Eastman Memo. I interviewed Eastman for close to an hour about the now infamous memo, and there's a whole thread here. Let's, shall we, let me see. I'll open this one up. I'll mark the Maggie Haberman tweet for inclusion in the roundup, and then that way I'll have links to all these things, and you can follow them along. Let me look at John McCormick's thread here. He says, I interviewed Eastman for close to an hour about the now infamous memo. And, of course, here is the Kodak moment. It's not Kodak. It's a digital picture, and it's in color, so it's not, nostalgic black and white. But it's interesting. I've seen this photo of him before. He's at the the so-called Stop the Steal rally. And it sounds like the neighbors are going to punctuate our discussion about that with a gas-powered trimmer, which is a perfect time for them to walk around with one of those. That's fantastic. So if it's not a Carolina Wren, it's a gas trimmer. Wonderful. Anyway, this picture of Eastman at the rally, remember it was in January. It was pretty cold, and I was... here's Rudy Giuliani is next to him. He's just in regular tie and jacket, and he looks a little bit cold. But Eastman is in an overcoat and like a silk scarf and a big old hat. Not cowboy hat, but a big fedora-ish wide brim styled thing, almost cowboy hat wide in the brim. And my first thought was it was Foster Freeze. Is what he looks like. And I don't know, was he dead already, Foster Freeze? So that would have saved me a lot of confusion. But anyway, here is John Eastman versus the Eastman memo. Should we read? I don't know if I'm going to read the whole piece or do I just read John McCormick's tweet thread summarizing it? If we're going to have to fit a lot of things in here, we ought not to make one of them a National Review article unless it's really outrageous. But let's see. Eastman on the Eastman memo's proposal for Pence to reject electoral college votes and send the election to the House. Quote, anybody who thinks that that's a viable strategy is crazy. It was his own memo. But, I'll explain myself again in just a few minutes about why that's particularly funny. It's got a screen grab here, I guess, from the National Review. What is he highlighting here? Howls, of course, from the Democrats, who now claim, contrary to Tribe's prior position, that 270 electoral votes is required. So Pence says, fine, okay, this is step 4, I guess, in his memo. Maybe that's what it is. And they're anticipating howls from Democrats who now claim, contrary to Lawrence Tribe's prior position, that 270 votes are required. I guess at some point, Lawrence Tribe floated the idea that, I don't know what, that you could elect a president with fewer than 270 electoral votes if you opted to take some of them out of the total pool because they were invalid in some way. Anyway, so Pence says fine. This is part of the memo. Pursuant to the 12th Amendment, no candidate has achieved the necessary majority. That sends the matter back to the House, where, quote, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote, unquote. That from the Constitution, of course. And then the highlighted bit here, Republicans currently control 26 of the state delegations. The bare majority needed to win that vote. President Trump is reelected there as well. So remember, that's an excerpt from the actual memo, and it's meant to set off the comment that McCormick gets out of Eastman now, saying, quote, anybody who thinks that that's a viable strategy is crazy. Though it's a strategy you presented to the then supposedly President of the United States. And that seems weird. Eastman's employer says his legal advice has been, quote, maliciously misrepresented by the media. In fact, most media outlets have accurately reported the content of the Eastman memo. The issue, Eastman says the memo he wrote doesn't reflect his own views. That is a bit of an issue. And then McCormick continues on here, I think concluding this thread, saying, at a January 4th meeting with Trump and Pence, Eastman cast doubt on Pence's authority to reject electoral votes. That was January 4th. But the evidence is overwhelming that Trump did, in fact, pressure Pence to reject electoral college votes and send the election to the House. Here, I think, is the excerpt from the National Review article that he sends along, I guess, as the most important part. A source close to Pence tells National Review that the position of Trump and some of his advisors was initially to pressure Pence to reject outright the count of the Electoral College votes in decisive states. Their position was to reject, says the source close to Pence. Look at the memo. The source says of the two-page, look at the memo. The source says of the two-page Eastman memo, and there was a 2-pager and a 6-pager. Remember that? That was the argument they were making. If you reject these out of hand, you get under the magical 270 number of electoral votes, and then it gets thrown to the House of Representatives. I think Eastman always caveated, can you do that? Caveated it as an experiment, like we can try that. I don't think he was ever assertive that Pence definitely should outright reject electoral votes, says the source. It's nuanced, but unhelpful to Eastman at this point. While Eastman calls the 2-page memo a preliminary memo for internal discussion purposes only, there is plenty of evidence that it reflected the official position of Trump. On January 2nd, Costa and Woodward report in peril. The 2-page memo was sent from the White House to Senator Mike Lee of Utah. On the morning of January 5th, the day after Eastman met with Trump and Pence in the White House, President Trump tweeted, quote, the vice president has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors. On the evening of January 5th, at a meeting between Trump and Pence in the White House, Trump still pushed his view that Pence could and should throw Biden's electors out and let the House decide the election, according to Peril, the book, anyway. All right. So, what makes it so interesting to me now? It almost makes it interesting enough to read the article, perhaps. I think I'll click through and get some sense of how long this thing is, and therefore whether we would benefit from reading all the way through it. And it looks to be pretty lengthy. I think that's the meat of it, is the idea that he's trying to distance himself somehow from all of this. I might read it, might not, might read it over the weekend. But what was interesting to me about it was having then seen Molly Jong-Fast say about Eastman, or about the comments made by Maggie Haberman on the Eastman development, was Molly reminds everybody, you'll remember Eastman from the Federalist Society. And, we all do, I think. I think that's of some interest. And a lot of people thought that was a really significant connection. I don't know whether it is or not in terms of the substance of what he wrote. But for me personally, it is a bit of an interesting connection in that, as I said, when the news of the Eastman memo emerged, my thinking on it was, well, I see why everybody's outraged about it. It would possibly make Donald Trump president again, and that is outrageous. It was outrageous that he was president the first time. And it's scary, and the mechanism by which they do it will not be recognized as legitimate by a lot of people, maybe even most people. And maybe only MAGA people would accept the legitimacy of it. But the idea of proposing a long-shot, last-ditch effort based on the either the inability of anybody else to stop the Congress from exercising this prerogative, or just getting it done before anybody knows what's happening, and then letting it come to rest on the declaration that Donald Trump is president, and that being the default position, and trying to have to find a way to dislodge him from that. Not unlike the Bush v. Gore situation, leaving the ball, where it was, and the idea of, first of all, of quickly overturning or getting Fox News to rescind the call of Florida for Gore so that it didn't become cemented in place and be the narrative that you had to displace. Quickly just switch it for Bush and then let Bush be the default answer and let Gore argue his way out of that. Here, I think the idea was, let's install Trump and see if anybody can push him out of this. But certainly the idea that the Congress could make even a purposefully wrong interpretation of what's in front of them, but then lean on their rulemaking prerogative, constitutional rulemaking prerogative, to argue in court that there's really nobody that can intervene and undo it, is familiar, as is, pushing the boundaries with the interpretation of what the rules and the law and the Constitution actually say about these things. I said at the time, it's not all that different from various ideas that I've thrown out there. For instance, on the possible installation of Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court while his nomination was then still pending at the very end of the Obama administration. Now, that idea probably has a lot fewer fans these days now that Merrick Garland has established a public record for himself as Attorney General, and a lot of people are unhappy with the way, for instance, he's so far been approaching dealing with the remnants of the Trump administration, let's say. But nonetheless, at the time, people were very excited about the idea of his being on the Supreme Court because something Democratic wins somehow. And you'll recall, you know the whole story of how he was blocked by Republicans. You might remember my description of this wild idea that, of course, the new Congress, after a presidential year election, the new Congress comes into office on January 3rd, and then so that they're in place on January 6th to count the electoral votes. And then, of course, the inauguration of the new president takes place on January 20th. So there was a period during which the new Republican majority Congress was, at least the new Republican majority Senate was, and it was still Republican majority, was supposed to remain in place, I guess, in the transfer of power from the period during which the power of the presidency was supposed to transfer at the end of the Obama administration into the Trump administration. And on January 3rd, I said, well, if you really screw around with things and allow yourself the full measure of congressional rulemaking prerogative, what if, since the Constitution dictates that senatorial terms end immediately before installing the new Congress on January 3rd. On January 3rd, 2020, the old congressional terms for the entirety of the House and 1/3 of the Senate expire, and then you install your new folks. At whatever, split-second moment there is after the adjournment sine die of the previous Congress, and it doesn't necessarily take place in just a second. It may just be a minute. But at any rate, at that point, 2/3 of the Senate, you remember the story, 2/3 of the Senate is still in their seats. The newly elected members of the Senate are standing there having presented their election credentials and are waiting for them to be, officially recognized and entered into the books, and then everybody gets sworn in. If at that moment, Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, and by virtue of that office, President of the Senate, should he show up and choose to take the gavel, could say, just a moment here. As you know, I'm the presiding officer here. We've just seen 1/3 of the Senate unseated by the completion of their term, and we're about to swear many of them back into a new term and convene the new Congress. But before we do that, at this very moment, there are 36 seated Democratic senators and 31 currently seated and continuing Republican senators. When we swear everybody in, there will be a Republican majority. But at this moment, among the 2/3 of us still in office, there's a Democratic majority. And by golly, there's something that strikes me about the election certifications sent to me by the various states for this new class of senators, perhaps all of them, or perhaps just the ones sent as Republicans, if you really wanted to be cutthroat about it. And it strikes me that there's something irregular and maybe even invalid about their election certificates, which is essentially what Eastman was saying Pence should do with the Electoral College votes. And you say, well, there's only one way to settle this. The question of whether or not to recognize these as valid election credentials falls to this House, the Senate, as currently constituted. The question of what to do with these people and whether or not to swear them in. Now, we could put that question aside for the moment, or we could decide it now, and we could decide it in favor of not seating any Republicans. But I didn't even need that. All I was going to say was, we'll settle that issue in 15 minutes from now, and we'll probably settle it in favor of recognizing all of their election certificates so that nobody gets sore about that. But before we do that, I just wanted to mention that there's a piece of pending business before us. The President of the United States, at the moment, Barack Obama, and that's the case for the next almost I guess about 2.5 weeks at that point, if it's January 3rd. So what do you have, 17 days or so left. The president has sent me a message in writing from the White House, and the clerk will report it. And lo and behold, it is the renomination, because it's under a new Congress, the renomination of Merrick Garland to the Supreme Court. And I ask for its immediate consideration by the Senate as currently constituted, 36 Democrats and 31 Republicans. And holy mackerel, there's no filibuster for Supreme Court nominations, or there's no, well, actually at that point there still was, I guess. But, let's have a majority vote about getting rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations. And poof, it's gone. And poof, they put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. And then poof, Joe Biden says, now on to other business. We have these election certificates I told you about a few minutes ago. Actually, on second pass, they look okay to me. Let's swear everybody in. And then you do so. And of course, the first thing they do is try and use their new majority to, I guess, undo somehow the Supreme Court nomination. But I don't know how they would be able to do it. They could impeach him at that point, but you would need a 2/3 vote to do that, at least according to the Constitution. I guess they could throw that out too. Anyway, you might remember all of that. And it was certainly shocking, the idea. And it all is based on, it only lasts if in the lawsuits to follow, the Supreme Court says, I'm sorry, it's a political question. The question of how to interpret the Senate's rules is the prerogative of the Senate alone. And presumably that's something that they can do by majority vote. And they did do it. And here it is on the record. And he's right. At the moment, at the time they did it, there were only 66, 67 senators. And that's because they messed with the schedule. But, that's up to them. I don't know that that's where the courts would really rest. They might say, we don't really have justification for this, but for the sake of, continuity of government and everyone's idea of how things are supposed to work, maybe that's not the best idea in the world. Anyway, the reason I bring it back up again, because, I anticipated a lot of people screaming about that and saying, no, that's outrageous. And of course there was plenty of people saying that's not everything from, well, I don't think so, or I'm not comfortable with that, to Sean, whatever his name is it Davis? Is that it? Anyway, he's actually, the thing is, he writing for the Federalist, and, one of the biggest Federalist Society mouthpieces out there. He was one of the loudest, screechiest, that's not the way it works, people, and screaming, this is idiotic and what a moron and how embarrassing it is to even have written such a thing. And now here we find ourselves 4 years later, and the Federalist Society and the Federalist, huge fans of doing exactly the thing that they said, that's not the way it works, that's crazy, and using it to install Donald Trump. The shoe was on the other foot, I understand. It's regular garden variety hypocrisy, even if it rises to the presidential level. I just thought that was pretty interesting. So I just wanted to remind you of that, and I guess that's why you haven't heard me yelling about the Eastman memo as horrific in all this time. Still bad, though. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Well, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. A little fight with the microphone, just a light tap on the post here, and it made a lot of noise. If you were wondering what that was, sorry about that. And all right, well, at any rate, moving on to a number of other issues that we have in store for you today. Let's see, Rebecca Roman sending us a couple of interesting news stories and Twitter trends, telling us about the latest stuff as well. Let's see, here's what I got for you on that. Let's see. First one Rebecca sent to me. I did see this one yesterday. I thought this one was funny and interesting. Let's see. Patrick Snyder, I think, also sent me this thing. Caught my attention yesterday. This, I'll give you the tweet. They both sent the same tweet on it from Annie Grayer at CNN. Interesting story, don't you think? On the House floor, and I think I also saw this from Molly Jong-Fast. She's running the show today. She was just, I think, retweeting it saying, this is nutso. On the House floor yesterday, the vote on holding Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress, successfully adopted on the House floor yesterday. I believe 9 Republican votes in favor of it, and Liz Cheney speaking in favor of it, Adam Kinzinger speaking in favor of it. I don't know how many other Republicans rather, spoke in favor. I did happen to see, a few of the more outrageous speeches against, etc. But at any rate, Liz Cheney on the House floor during her speech enters into the record this very interesting historical artifact. As Annie Grayer puts it, on the House floor, Liz Cheney entered this into the record, calling out Jim Banks, Republican, of where? Let's see. Shall we enlarge his letter so we can figure out where he's from? I mean, I don't remember, and I have to squint at the screen and bring it up close in order to see Indiana, 3rd District of Indiana. It says on his stationery. So this is on his letterhead. A letter dated September 16th, 2021, about which Greyer says, Liz Cheney entered this into the record, calling out Jim Banks for sending letters to government agencies, claiming he is the ranking member of the January 6th committee, even though he is not on the committee. And this is a letter to Secretary Deb Haaland at the Department of the Interior, saying, demanding copies of whatever documents they might be sending to the January 6th committee, because he's the ranking member in his mind. By way of background, you may remember that Jim Banks was the member whom Kevin McCarthy, as Republican leader, put forth in nomination to serve as the highest ranking Republican on the January 6th Commission. But he, along with the nominations of Jim Jordan, and I don't remember whether he also sent Matt Gaetz or not, but he sent the regular crew of disruptors and screamers to be nominated to disrupt and scream all the way through the January 6th committee's proceedings, and they were rejected outright. Pelosi just refused those nominations and didn't. The House voted on the membership of the committee, and they just excluded Banks and Jordan and others, though they did opt to place Kinzinger and Cheney there. So it is a bipartisan committee. It's just very heavily weighted in non-insurrectionists, as it should be. Anyway, Banks, though, I guess, has been attempting to tell people that, he's the ranking member in exile or something like that. That would have been a funny way to sign the letter. But here's it is. Standard letter. Dear Secretary Haaland. I hope I have her pronunciation correct. You're receiving this letter because the House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate the events of January 6th may have sent you a request for information. Was it may have? Did they or didn't they? I don't know. The House, I don't know what they would have wanted from the Department of Interior. Oh, maybe because Parks and Park Police would have fallen under their jurisdiction. The House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, appointed me to serve as the ranking member of the Select Committee, yet House Speaker Nancy Pelosi refused to allow me to fulfill my duties as ranking member. Pursuant to the rules of the House of Representatives, the minority party in Congress retains rights to the same information that is provided to the majority party. For those reasons, that's one reason. For those reasons, I ask that you provide me any information that is submitted to the Select Committee. Additionally, please include me on any update or briefing that you provide. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to contact my staff. There's a number. It's a publicly available number. If you want to call Jim Banks and tell him he's an idiot, if you feel like it, it's in here. And it's on display. They're not hiding it. You want it? 202-225-4436. Don't prank call him, but you can. If you live in Indiana, certainly in his district, you can call him and tell him you think that was foolish of him. And there's his signature over Jim Banks, ranking member, which he's not. But anyway, that raises all sorts of questions about whether or not it is unethical or unlawful to pose this way, but I'm not sure how to answer that exactly. You could. The only real thing you could do about it is you could make a referral to the ethics committee. Something might come out of it. You could think about expelling him or reprimanding him or something, but you might be able to get away with a reprimand because that's just requires a majority vote in the House, and you might be able to muster that. Expulsion, of course, requires 2/3, and that ain't happening anytime soon. Okay. Let's see. Other items up for discussion today. I thought that was a pretty interesting one. What else has Rebecca sent me here? Burgess Everett's tweet this morning saying that there's some news. Sources familiar. What's the sources familiar? Ways Cinema. Something. I don't know. Cinema. Kirsten Cinema maybe says, maybe that's it, the typo. Source familiar says, Sinema, quote, has agreed to provisions in each of President Biden's 4 proposed revenue categories: international, domestic, corporate, high net worth individuals, and tax enforcement, providing sufficient revenue to fully pay for the reconciliation package. So that's a thread of some interest. Yeah, I think we can boil that down to what I was able to glean from this morning's quick reading. Sinema, we haven't discussed her in a couple of days. Sinema staked out a position against increasing taxes at all. The way she put it was, not a penny more of tax increases. But she left the door cracked just a little bit open, which she apparently, in clarification to somebody, not us or not the news media, but apparently the position she was taking was that she was against raising tax rates. You could increase revenues for the federal government by, for instance, eliminating loopholes, just so long as you left the rate intact and didn't increase the rate. Eliminating loopholes or spending money on better and more fastidious enforcement of tax laws in order to find tax cheats and prosecute them more aggressively and collect the taxes owed. So apparently she left the door open for that kind of increase in revenues. And as it turns out, in these 4 distinct areas here, President Biden's 4 categories: international taxation, domestic corporate taxation, high net worth individuals, and tax enforcement, that you could cobble together enough, get projections that they would raise enough revenue to pay for the reconciliation package. So that was good news and interesting and nuanced and fun. And I guess that's what Everett's talking about here, Burgess Everett. So let's read the rest of his... that's it for his tweet. That's it by itself. I thought it was a thread, but it's just him correcting the ways into says. So now we know that we guessed it correctly. Anyway, that's good news. Also on the good news front, I guess that is more. Most of us are probably saying, well, I'll wait and see until that comes to fruition before I get too excited about that. Is the news from the New York Times, reported this morning by Michael Shear and Emily Cochran under the headline of Biden is open to scrapping filibuster for voting rights bill and maybe more. I don't want to get too excited, but it's news. Let's share it. The president said any push to, quote, fundamentally alter the Senate's 60-vote threshold would have to wait until after Congress passed his vast spending agenda. I guess it's his preference. We'll see whether anybody else opts to adopt this same preference. President Biden said on Thursday that he was open to ending the Senate filibuster so Democrats could pass voting rights legislation, raise the federal widely publicized, widely watched, but you know what happens when there's a widely watched presidential address or appearance. For me, especially if it's after hours, no thanks. But by all accounts, well done there. And speaking at this town hall meeting, the president also expressed optimism about passage of his infrastructure and social safety net bills, even as he offered candid descriptions of closed-door negotiations with 2 Democratic holdouts. And here comes the lawnmower to follow up the trimmer. Excellent. Everyone enjoy. It's really close and really loud, isn't it? It's why it sounds like. Does it sound like a John Deere to you? I don't know. I can't identify the call. Toro? I don't know. We'll go outside and see if we can figure it out. Anyway, he offered candid descriptions of closed-door negotiations with 2 Democratic holdouts. And by the way, also in the news yesterday, lots of other candid descriptions of his closed-door negotiations. Republicans were clasping their pearls and fainting over his use of colorful language in private. But then he's also the guy who was caught on the hot mic saying this is a big effing deal about the Affordable Care Act, right? I think we all knew that about Joe Biden. Anyway, Mr. Biden it's the New York Times, had previously said that changing the filibuster rules to allow a debt limit vote was a real possibility. That's a quote, a real possibility. But his remarks on Thursday evening suggested that he was ready to pursue broader changes to bypass Republican opposition. At the town hall, he said ending the filibuster, a Senate tradition that allows the majority party to kill legislation that fails to garner 60 votes, sorta, would have to wait until after he secured passage of his spending bills, which are under negotiation on Capitol Hill. That could be simply a preference for timing, but it also could have greater implications just in terms of, like, if we're going to have this fight over getting people on board on reconciliation, like the whole need for reconciliation goes out the window if you're screwing around with eliminating or partially eliminating a filibuster. But I think the timing is probably more about Manchin and Sinema would really prefer not to have to cast that vote on changing filibuster rules, and they'll have to in order to make it work. I mean, just having the president say he thinks it ought to happen, of course, isn't enough. You need at least 50 votes plus the vice president to make this thing happen. And it may have been discussed at some point, but made clear to him, yeah, please, let's just conclude this thing we've been working on. And after that, we can talk about the filibuster thing. If you make me do the filibuster vote now before I finish this thing I want to get done, I'm going to be mad and I might not be with you. So, that might be reason enough to wait. The president said he would lose, quote, at least 3 votes on his social policy bill if he pushed an end to the filibuster. Yeah, if he pushed it first, anyway. He did not say which senators he would lose, but Mr. Biden was blunt about his intentions once the debate over the spending bills was over. He said the need to pass sweeping voting rights legislation favored by Democrats is equally as consequential as the debt limit vote, which protects the full faith and credit of the United States. So that's got to be pretty important, right? Asked by Anderson Cooper, the host of the event, whether that meant he would be open to ending the use of the filibuster so that Democrats could pass a voting rights bill, Mr. Biden said, and maybe more. The president said that activists who are pushing to end the filibuster to pass voting rights legislation, quote, make a very good point, adding, we're going to have to move to the point where we fundamentally alter the filibuster. All right. Liberal activists have grown increasingly frustrated with Mr. Biden over the past several months as Republicans used the filibuster to prevent action on major parts of the Democratic agenda. They have accused the president and his allies in Congress of being too passive by refusing to change the rules. On Wednesday, Republicans blocked action on legislation to bolster voting rights for the 3rd time since Mr. Biden took office. All 50 Democrats and independents supported bringing the Freedom to Vote Act to the floor, but all 50 Republicans voted against doing so, thwarting legislation that Democrats say would counter efforts in Republican-controlled states to impose new voting restrictions. Some Democrats have urged the president to push for modifications to the filibuster so that he can pass an immigration overhaul, also address prison reform and enact more ambitious climate change legislation. If the filibuster remains intact, they argue, Mr. Biden will leave office with half of his priorities unmet. Black and brown voters are tired of the same scene playing out over and over. Stephanie R. Spaulding, spokeswoman for Just Democracy, said in a statement last week, we launch Herculean mobilizations to get Democrats elected. Democrats bring legislation to the floor that would benefit communities of color, and Republicans won't even engage in good faith debate. Senate Democrats can no longer divorce the filibuster from the promises and the issues they ran on, she added. They must act with urgency to get rid of the filibuster. Okay. I'm glad to see them coming around to my position. They've always been there, I think. But I'm glad to see so many more organizations doing this work. It's, only possible because of the work we did earlier, showing them that, this can be done and here's how. And it's easy. And it's been done before. And then we did some of it, and now they know for sure because we demonstrated it for them. Democrats appeared to gain some momentum toward changing the filibuster rules this month after Republicans threatened to use the tool to prevent an increase in the debt limit, a move that economists said could lead to a financial disaster. But Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the minority leader, backed down and allowed a vote on a bill that raised the debt ceiling until at least early December. I think because they knew that this was coming otherwise. Mr. Biden's comments on Thursday are likely to give Democratic activists some renewed hope that he will take on the filibuster. He also said he supported the idea of bringing back a rule that would require senators to conduct a filibuster by actually speaking and automatically ending the procedure once two senators had given their speeches. I don't think that's... What kind of reading of it is that? Bring back a rule that would require... I mean, there's the talking filibuster, obviously. Automatically ending the procedure once two senators have given their speeches. I don't really even know where they're getting that from. The president spoke of the filibuster during a 90-minute event in which he also expressed confidence that Democrats were closer to a deal on his sprawling domestic policy package, which he said would surpass the Affordable Care Act in its scope, an even bigger effing deal, I guess, and impact on American society. To advance that package despite unanimous Republican opposition, Democrats are using a fast-track budget process known as reconciliation, which shields fiscal legislation from a filibuster. All true, but only you know why. That's one of the points of pride in the way we do the show here. I mean, I don't think you could avoid it, but, we explain, as we said, the living bleep out of everything, so... you can explain to people who don't get it from the New York Times because the New York Times considers it a waste of space. And it is for them, just not for us, to explain how it is that reconciliation shields fiscal legislation from a filibuster. But and that's important. But Mr. Biden needs the support of all 50 Senate Democrats, all 48 Senate Democrats and the 2 independents. They put it very nicely earlier, talking about the fact that they got all the independents to vote with them on it too. And I like emphasizing that. And so does Bernie Sanders, and so does Angus King. Bernie Sanders likes to remind everybody that you need tripartisan cooperation on things when you bring together Democrats and independents like him, plus Republicans. Anyway, all 50 Democrats or whatever, and nearly every House Democrat supporting would need to be in support of the reconciliation bill. We're down to 4 or 5 issues, which I'm not going to negotiate on national television, he said. Lawmakers and aides familiar with the discussion say talks are largely focused on up to $2 trillion in spending over 10 years. That's helpful. Thanks a lot. But after weeks of talks largely shrouded in secrecy, the president laid out a detailed assessment of how he and congressional Democrats were trimming an initial $3.5 trillion blueprint, including negotiations with 2 centrist, I would have put that in quotes, holdouts. Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema are the 2. And by the way, they're probably also 2 of the 3 votes that Biden thinks he'd lose if he went to change the filibuster before passing reconciliation and the infrastructure bill. Anybody's guess as to the 3rd. Mr. Biden acknowledged that expanding Medicare benefits to cover dental, vision, and hearing, long championed by Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, was a reach because of Mr. Manchin, and he believed Ms. Sinema. Instead, the president said they were looking to provide an $800 voucher for dental work. Ms. Sinema appeared open to the hearing benefit, he added, and negotiations were continuing over vision. By the way, plenty of seniors in Arizona who would be thrilled to have that, and plenty of people of all ages in West Virginia who could really use that as well. So I don't know why they're standing in the way of that one, but I guess that's why they're working so hard on trying to find a solution that will at least partially offer those benefits instead of doing it the easy way. Look, in the United States Senate, when you have 50 Democrats, everyone is the president, Mr. Biden said. Well, that's interesting. He publicly conceded that his plans to increase the corporate tax rate could be jettisoned from the bill because of Ms. Sinema's opposition. But now it looks like it might not be happening quite that way. She says she will not raise a single penny in taxes on the corporate side and or on wealthy people, period, Mr. Biden said. So that's sort of where it breaks down. Ms. Sinema has privately committed to enough alternative tax provisions to fully fund up to $2 trillion in spending, said a person familiar with her thinking, whatever it might be. A White House official later clarified that the president was specifically referring to the corporate rate. Okay, so that comports with what we've heard this morning. But while Ms. Sinema was supportive of Mr. Biden's environmental agenda and much of his proposed spending, he said Mr. Manchin remained opposed to a clean electricity program. Instead, the president said he had pushed Mr. Manchin, who had balked at spending more than $1.5 trillion, to approve redirecting around $150 billion set aside for the program toward other policies that would encourage climate-friendly action. Okay, we're almost done here. Joe is open to my convincing him that I can use it to increase environmental progress without it being that particular deal, Biden said. He also conceded that 2 years of free community college would be dropped from the plan because of opposition from Mr. Manchin and at least one other Democrat, and that he was instead looking to increase the money available for Pell Grants. The duration, that's small potatoes compared to what they were talking about, but the duration of a federal paid family and medical leave program had been cut to 4 weeks from 12, Mr. Biden said, and he rejected a proposal reportedly raised by Mr. Manchin that an expansion of monthly payments to families with children should have a work requirement. That was good pushback. Glad to see that. That's the end of the article. Also glad to see that, because it gives us room to move on to some of the other things. I did feel like, the town hall was a major event, and I didn't watch it, and I thought it was a good use of our time to not only lead with the filibuster reform possibility news, but fill you in on what happened at the town hall as well. All right, let's see. Definitely have some other things here. We'll see what I can squeeze in before the break, and then we have those long form pieces that I think we might want to take the second hour to talk about. But let's see. What can we squeeze in here? One, just quickly, the news that I got from our friend That Guy last night as I was tweeting out the nightly coronavirus numbers. And I've been noticing for a couple of days now, and I figured I'd make a comment about it yesterday, that the UK, in the international numbers, the UK seems to be entering into a full-blown new wave. I hate to make that joke because then I started getting pictures from people of all, British new wave bands. But I don't know how many waves the UK considers itself to have had, and I don't know whether this would be a fifth wave for them or a sixth wave, but I do think they're headed into another wave with another node and another peak, which I didn't really have an explanation for. But their numbers, daily new case numbers, have been increasing quickly and steadily for a little while now. And then if you look at the graph of, the bar graph of daily reports, you can see that next wave emerging. And That Guy shared with me this BBC News piece, COVID-19, new mutation of Delta variant under close watch in UK. That sounds pretty bad. They're not giving it a new Greek letter all to itself. It's a variant of Delta. I don't know what they do with that and what the naming protocol is there. But Michelle Roberts, health editor of BBC News Online, reports officials are keeping a close watch on a new descendant of the Delta variant of COVID that is causing a growing number of infections. Delta is the UK's dominant variant, but the latest official data suggests 6% of COVID cases that have been genetically sequenced are of a new type, which I guess they're just scientifically calling AY.4.2. I don't know if they say the point, but AY4.2, which some are calling Delta Plus, that's a little easier, contains mutations that might give the virus survival advantages. Tests are underway to understand how much of a threat it may pose. Experts say it is unlikely to take off in a big way or escape current vaccines, though, so that's not so bad. It is not yet considered a variant of concern or a variant under investigation. The category is assigned to variants and the level of risk associated with them. What is AY 4.2? There are thousands of different types or variants of COVID circulating across the world. Viruses mutate all the time, so it's not surprising to see new versions emerge. Original Delta was classified as a variant of concern in the UK in May of 2021, after overtaking the Alpha variant to become the dominant type of COVID in circulation. But in July, experts identified this AY 4.2. This offshoot or sublineage of Delta has been increasing slowly since then. It includes some new mutations affecting the spike protein, which the virus uses to penetrate our cells. So far, there's no indication that it is considerably more transmissible as a result of these changes, but it is something experts are studying. So maybe it doesn't actually explain the rise in cases, but it's a factor, perhaps. Anyway, kind of interesting. I don't know if they'll explain. Maybe they'll. I would like my explanation that I want is why AY 4.2. What does that actually mean? What can I tell from that? And that's not, I don't think, as far as I can tell, in the article. Okay. Well, anyway, keep an eye on the UK. They're getting into some trouble. So just letting you know that the numbers indicate that we should be hearing more news about that in the coming days. All right, one other thing I want to put in here. I probably should spend more time reading the story, but I don't know if it's going to happen. But I thought a good point being made here by Michael Harriot, whose writing we have had read to us on the show. I think it was, Darwin had read his pieces before. Anyway, he's making some interesting observations on the passing of Colin Powell, but more interestingly than just that, the way that Colin Powell's passing was treated in the American press, and making this great observation, I think right up at the top here. Politics aside, Colin Powell was a black man in America is the headline, but more tellingly, the subheader here really tells the story, and I can squeeze that in still before our break. The former Secretary of State worked for administrations most black people opposed, yet many African Americans respected him. And that, I think, is one of the more interesting bits here. Oh, how come this music is not playing? There we go. All right, well, every once in a while, Soundboard decides to think that I have triggered the pause all button, usually when the computer falls asleep. And you know what? Ironically, the computer falls asleep when I've been talking for too long. Just like my family. And maybe you. Anyway, I just thought this was an interesting piece, and it comes highly recommended, so you might want to spend some time checking it out. That was a great point, I think. Working for administrations that, well... All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Coming back at an unusual time in the music because of the delay in starting it. And, of course, having talked straight into the break because of the weird timing of the music. But anyway, just wanted to say, again, I thought that was a really good point made and concise, too, to make that point right up at the top in the subheader. But it looks like a good piece, not terribly overlong, but maybe something you want to sit down with and think about. Michael Harriot very often offering just that up in whatever he's writing about. So add it to your list, I guess. All right. Now I thought maybe we would turn to some of the other longer reads, although there are a few other smaller stories that I thought I might add in before we move on here. Let me also have to check up on some of these other items I have here to make sure that I've got all the news. In smaller news bits, I think I'll add this without reading the entirety of the article. You could go on for some time here with the New York Times article by Michael Schmidt and Katie Benner. So, big names on the byline. It's meant to be a piece of a long involved thread. But all you'll want to know is Justice Department adds 2 top prosecutors to the Matt Gaetz case. The move by the department is a sign of the complex and high-stakes nature of the sex trafficking investigation into Representative Gaetz, a close ally of Donald Trump. Seen by some as a hopeful development. My mind went immediately to the Mueller investigation and the idea, they kept saying, we're adding, money laundering specialists to the prosecutorial team. And it just ended up being, the whole thing ended up being a giant disappointment. So Mueller shows up eventually and says, well, all these crimey things happened. I don't know what to tell you about it. I don't know what to do. That's up to you. You guys do what you want to do. I'm not recommending anything. And that was kind of the end of it. And I was typing a cynical, note about this news yesterday into Twitter, and I just ended up deleting it because what do I care? But I think I did see, I can't remember who said it. And now I'll see if I can find it. But it's one of the, one of the former prosecutors, former U.S. attorneys that we very frequently hear from on these high-profile cases. I can't remember his name correctly offhand, but it was Renato something or another. I mean, gosh, you all remember who I'm talking about here? He's a big, there he is, Renato Mariotti, who is a big former prosecutor and a big Twitter voice. And I think he was saying, let me see if I can scroll out. He doesn't, he says something similar about it. So here's the news that of the addition of the 2 new prosecutors. He says, this is not something the Justice Department does when a case is going nowhere. But he did also say, I thought yesterday, that this is something that is very frequently a play of desperate prosecutors who might be running into a brick wall, too. So it's not that the case is going nowhere, but it's I don't think it's always a very good sign for the outcome, necessarily. I think it shows that things are in doubt. But I don't know. It sounded yesterday, maybe I misread what he was saying yesterday, but it sounded in passing like he was saying, it comported with what I thought about the Mueller investigation. That was taken as good news. Like, they're only going to bring on these new prosecutors if they really mean to use them. But sometimes in a high-profile case where it has to continue to look like there's momentum, even if there isn't any, I'm a little worried about it, is what I'm saying. But anyway, it's in the news. You should know about it. And maybe you have questions about why am I not screaming about it and enjoying the fact that Matt Gaetz should be sweating a sex trafficking charge. He should be. He's not. And whatever. It worries me that he's not. Okay, so there was that news. And let's see, what else? There were a couple of other things. Oh, no, there's the Molly Jong Fast tweet about how nuts it was for Joe Banks, or whatever his name was, to circulate that letter. Do I have that wrong? Is it Jim Banks? And Joe Banks is who? Is that the guy from Joe versus the Volcano? Is that the name of the character? Yeah, I think I mixed that up. All right. Well, maybe Mark will have something to say about that. It's one of his favorite movies. Okay, you tell me, Mark. My brother Mark is a big fan of Joe versus the Volcano, so maybe I'll get a tweet about that. Occasionally hear from him during the show. All right, let's see. Other things I wanted to show before getting into the long stuff? No, I think we're probably done on that. There are a million other stories, of course, that I would share with you. And I said of the long stories, one I might go into is lawfare. All right, let's do it. We'll start with lawfare. And then the second story I'd like to get to, if I don't get to it, my bad and all, but developing story, once again, developing out of here, Loudoun County, Virginia. I got to at least lay the groundwork for that one. It's become very quickly a nationalized story. And you may have heard a little bit about it. And it's very weird and unclear and ambiguous, but it's becoming an issue that it is unclear and ambiguous. But Republicans want to latch onto the next round of complaints at school boards and make it a national issue. And they want, in particular, to launch it and inject it into the bloodstream of the Virginia gubernatorial contest in the hopes that they will pull out a win for Youngkin and reverse all the trends and say, see, we're going to win, and this is the winning issue. But a fight over not CRT, not masking or vaccine policy at the schools, but transgender issues in the schools. And this, that's a bit of a manufactured controversy as it is, but this is a manufactured controversy about manufactured controversy that has shown such promise that, one, they're trying to engineer introducing it into the whole parents movement thing. Parents for Youngkin is the big new organizing group or theme around it. But Youngkin trying to say that Terry McAuliffe and National Democrats are against allowing parents to have any say in education, and this new directive from the Attorney General to do something about the number of people who are threatening the lives of school board members is really about censoring parents. And it's really not. But they're trying to conflate all these issues. That's what I want to get to in the second part of our long reads. Damn, I should just start in on that. Maybe we will. Let's do that, and we'll save the lawfare for later, because we have given a lot of thought already to executive privilege claims, and now that they've voted the contempt resolution on Bannon, it's old news. So maybe I'll switch. I clearly want to change directions. Now, how to dive into this, I really couldn't tell you. Did I put aside I probably didn't. I was thinking I put aside possibly some Newsweek articles about that. Yeah, I guess I did. Here we are. Let me start with this one, explaining what's going on here, sort of. Newsweek, October 13th. Ewan, how do you pronounce the name? E-W-A-N. Owen or Ewan? Ewan. No, probably not. Owen Palmer for Newsweek, writing under the headline of Scott Ziegler, the Loudoun County Superintendent of Schools, faces calls to resign over school assault allegations. So let me give you the plain vanilla, Newsweek is plain vanilla, approach to what's going on here. And they do get at all the relevant stuff, enough for you to get the hint of what's going on here. And Newsweek had like 5 articles on this, all on the 13th, some written by the same people, but they don't quite work together. Anyway, several parents have demanded that Loudoun County School Board's superintendent resign over allegations that the school district covered up 2 sexual assaults alleged to have occurred on school grounds. A school board meeting in Loudoun County, Virginia, became heated on Tuesday. They're all heated for different reasons. This is the new one, the new hotness. Became heated on Tuesday after parents vented their anger over 2 separate incidents which allegedly occurred at Broad Run High School and Stonebridge High School. Now, they have reversed the alleged chronological order of those 2, but that's okay. Hint number 1, that something is going wrong here. In an interview with The Daily Wire, that the Daily Wire is being used as a vehicle to break the story is a hint. Daily Wire, in case you don't know offhand, Ben Shapiro's operation. But in an interview with the Daily Wire, Scott Smith, a father who was arrested at a previous Loudoun County School Board meeting on June 22nd after a debate over a draft policy on transgender and non-binary students' rights escalated, alleged that his daughter was sexually assaulted at Stonebridge High School by a student allegedly dressed, it says with, as opposed to in, dressed with a skirt on May 28th. So, perfect place to circulate a story like that, the Daily Wire. And, I guess without commenting on it too much, obviously, a father whose daughter has been sexually assaulted at school is going to be outraged. So it's a perfectly understandable in that sense. Although, they also realize it's also a perfect platform to launch an attack of all sorts, a broad spectrum attack against all sorts of liberal boogeymen. And so therefore, let's do it in the Daily Wire, where they won't ask me any questions like, what do you mean dressed in a skirt? How do you know that this student was dressed in a skirt? Where did you hear that? Well, he could say, I heard it from my daughter, who was the victim of the attack. But he never actually says that, which is kind of weird. At least I don't think so. Or maybe we have to look at the Daily Wire report in order to see exactly how he describes it. But I have the feeling that other outlets might have been a little credulous about that. And before reading on with the article, I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler of the points I think made in the article, mainly because I'm not positive they spell it out in this article, but they do in previous accompanying articles, just to explain how all of this goes on. Because it's very easy to see why parents would get irate about, certainly about an attack, but about this lack of information about the actual attacks and lack of information about what's being done about them. Underlying all of this is we are talking about juveniles here, and when it comes to treatment of their cases, the law is often very, very different, and it doesn't permit as much discussion of the facts or release of the facts by investigating police or other investigating authorities, in this case the school board, if there is any such investigation. And they very often withhold those details from the public and from the school board. The school board only deals with a very, very narrow slice of disciplinary cases. Most of that stuff is handled well below their level. They only, I guess, get into it when there's, strict questions of policy or whether policy ought to be reformulated in, as a result of the disciplinary problem and its resolution at lower levels of the school organization. But even so, even when it rises at that level, very rarely are the details revealed to the school board because of the sensitive nature of juvenile justice in this country, and in particular in Virginia and in this county. So that underlies a lot of it. And, a lot of the real heat and outrage is, what are you afraid of? What are you covering up? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's not, at bottom, it ends up not being a matter of a cover-up. It's a matter of how you handle information about juvenile cases. But that's too nuanced for screamers, So, while I give a lot of leeway to screamers who are the parents of actual victims directly, I do have questions about why they would, in a situation where access to the information about juvenile cases is purposely restricted, would they say, well, who doesn't care about those restrictions? The Daily Wire. I'll take my story to them, and then I can say whatever I want, and no one can confirm it or deny it because the whole case is sealed because it involves juveniles. That's what's happening here, what I want to impart to you. All right, continuing with the Newsweek article. During the June 22nd meeting in which Smith was arrested after being dragged out, Superintendent Scott Ziegler dismissed any concerns about assaults on school grounds allegedly committed by transgender students. That's a very, that's a summary that does him no good. Dismissed any concerns, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Scott Ziegler, I don't think, does himself any favors necessarily by saying, quote, "To my knowledge, we don't have any record of assaults occurring in our restrooms," he said. And it turns out that it sounds like there is a record of at least one assault occurring in a restroom. But, again, the parents' groups here take off wildly with this thing because it's every transgender opponent's transgender policy or any permissive policy when it comes to recognizing the rights of transgender or gender fluid students. Their first nightmare for people who can't handle that stuff is, what's that they're going to be lying in wait for my daughter in the bathroom. And I mean, I understand the roots of the concern, but of course, taking it and running with it and saying that's totally happening all the time and we must do something about it is an absurdity. And it bothers me when it's used as a launching pad for, well, certainly for a political agenda on top of it. And that's what's happening here, I think. All right. I think it's important to keep our perspective on this. This is still Ziegler. We've heard it several times tonight from our public speakers, but the predator transgender student or person simply does not exist. That worried me a great deal, too, because, I had, as a local, seen the reports. But that's what got me wondering about it. Well, wait a second. What do we really know about this case? What we know is a parent has told XYZ outlet and then speaks to another outlet, too. And that gets reported as he spoke to the Daily Wire. And, by the way, the other outlet he speaks to about this, the Daily Caller, Tucker Carlson's operation. And that's clue number 2. It strikes me that this parent who should be screaming about a story to anyone who'll listen has only been talking to the Daily Wire and the Daily Caller about this stuff. And the problem that the media continues to have is Newsweek or whoever else, they reported, he said this and it was a transgender student and he was wearing that. And here's the conclusions the guy reaches inexplicably. But these are all in interview. He said in an interview with the Daily Wire, and then no word about what is the Daily Wire and how is it that the Daily Wire is able to get exclusively interviews with this guy who has this compelling story to tell. Oh, it's not exclusive. He also spoke to the Daily Caller, but also no explanation of what the Daily Caller is and what things they'll do to create a story that isn't true but sells. And that's what made me think, maybe Scott Ziegler really has something here, the way he puts his words very carefully. The predator, transgender student, or person simply does not exist. I mean, it seems hard to defend in light of the fact that they do concede that these attacks took place. And then the other outlets do the job of the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire for them by saying, yeah, there was such an attack reported by the Daily Wire, which we just treat as a normal outlet that would never lie about anything or carry anyone else's lies about anything. And then the rest of the world gets to conclude from the Newsweek whitewashing of this that Ziegler's lying. Of course there's a predator transgender student. I read it in, Newsweek. Smith, to go back to the article, said he became irate at the comments, knowing that his daughter had allegedly been assaulted just weeks beforehand. 5 months later, another alleged sexual assault by the same teenager, I guess also allegedly, took place at Broad Run High School in October. But again, the dates are important here, just so you have them in mind. First assault allegedly at Stonebridge High School, May 28th. Dad alleges student who committed the assault dressed in a skirt. Where does he allege this? Daily Wire. Then, June 22nd, meeting of the school board, Smith arrested after being dragged out screaming because Scott Ziegler said, to my knowledge, we have no record of assaults occurring in our restrooms, and the transgender student or person simply doesn't exist. Smith becomes irate in June, dragged out. 5 months later, another alleged assault, same teenager, at Broad Run High School, October. Important. May, June, October. The Loudoun County Sheriff's Office told Newsweek it could not confirm if it was the same suspect, as juvenile reports are excluded from disclosure, with suspect's criminal history information also exempt under Virginia code. Though you might wonder, how many high schools does this kid attend, right? It may very well be the same student. I don't know. I don't think we have that information. But they do point out that we might not know that for sure. And you could be transferring the kid. It is possible, especially if he's wrapped up in an investigation that could turn out to implicate him or could turn out not, that the implication is wrong, but he's got to survive in school this whole time with his peers thinking that they know what was going on, even if it wasn't what was going on. So I could see perhaps a transfer, but then that morphed into it's a cover-up, just like with the Catholic Church. When a priest gets in trouble, they transfer him to another parish to try and make the problem go away. But without any details available and none forthcoming because it's a juvenile case, that narrative is too easy to take root and too difficult to dismiss. So they figured, what the F? We'll use that narrative, whether it's right or not. Loudoun County Sheriff says, can't help you because juveniles. During Tuesday's meeting, a number of parents expressed their concerns over the alleged assaults while calling for Superintendent Scott Ziegler to stand down. Of course, that's the favorite go-to now. Whatever. We're angry with you about something we know to be true and is provably true. Step down. We're angry at you about something we can't prove at all, and there's no way we're ever going to be able to prove it. Stand down. We're angry about something we made up and isn't true and will eventually be proven that we're liars. Still, we want you to resign in the meantime. Now some of the comments from parents. How do you expect parents across this county to drop off their kids and entrust you all to keep them safe when you've shown on more than one occasion you are not up for the job? Monica Sadeghi said via 7 News on Your Side. I hate when they do those sort of investigate. I like the idea of those, channel whatever on your side thing, but then when they leverage their power for something that might not be true, it kind of sucks. So maybe that's the downside of it. But, typical parent comment and the sort of thing that people applaud. Yeah. They can't keep our kids safe. How could we trust you? You need to resign because 2 kids were assaulted. Now, by the way, Monica Sadeghi has been, I would imagine, I don't know for sure, but my guess is she's been nowhere on the many, many, many sexual assaults that occur in high schools all around the country all the time, and statistically are happening here in Loudoun County high schools as well. But, they've latched on to the transgender nightmare. So this is now a thing. And how do we, drop our kids off at school? And parents all across this country, how do we drop our kids off at school when you failed to keep them safe on more than one occasion? More than one is 2. There are 2 alleged here, so that's it. Now, like I said, there's assaults of all kinds, sexual and otherwise, happening in Loudoun County schools because that's just what happens in schools. It's terrible. You try to clamp down on it. It's not running rampant as a problem, but, no one ever says anything like, how do you expect me to drop my kid off at school when there was a fight at Liberty High School just last week and you're not keeping kids safe? People would say, a fight. Boys will be boys. That's the kind of assault there. Yeah, we're happy with that. That's a good all-American assault. This other one, which might have happened, maybe it didn't. We can't tell. That one's terrible. Then the next comment here, making the comparison to the church. When the Catholic Church passed predator priest from parish to parish, the walls came eventually crashing down on them. Not so much, really, but anyway. And they were finally held accountable, for the abuse. When is Dr. Ziegler and his board going to be held accountable? Added Teresa Lieberman. Well, the answer is at the next election, when you always hold boards accountable. But, of course, you'll be holding them accountable on, maybe truth, maybe not. But anyway, that's the comparison. And it's not a good one either because they're not moving a priest from parish to parish. They're moving a kid who's been accused, maybe, and they might not even be doing it. Might not be the same kid. We just don't know. But if you assume that you're right, they're moving a kid who's been accused to somewhere else until they can settle the issue because that's the way you deal with juvenile justice. Smith told the Daily Wire that the subject raped his daughter in the girls' bathroom at Stonebridge High School in Ashburn. Probably telling the truth about the story that his daughter told him. I don't have any reason to doubt that at this point. But yeah, like I said, it makes for a nightmare. And the thing is, like you say, all right, well, every parent's nightmare, right? The girl is, I guess, stalked and attacked by somebody hiding in the girl's bathroom, which is bad, terrible, awful, horrific. But also makes people think, well, what's a boy doing? And I think it was a 14-year-old or 15-year-old, 14, I think at the time, boy who did it. And we don't know anything about the kid, so we can't say whether it's a boy who identifies as a girl or not. But we might ask, what's he doing in there? Well, obviously, waiting to commit a crime, apparently, raping a girl who gets in there. But I think what this is triggering for people is, let me read on. And you'll see what's happening. And the other clues here. So Smith told the Daily Wire the suspect raped his daughter in the girls' bathroom at Stonebridge High School in Ashburn, a section of Loudoun County. He alleges the student took advantage of the school's policy 8040. School's policy 8040, which was passed in August. Remember, I told you the timeline is interesting, right? The rape takes place allegedly, in May. He says the student took advantage of the school's policy passed in August to allow students to use their name and gender pronouns and permit gender-expansive and transgender students to use school facilities such as locker rooms and bathrooms that correspond to their consistently asserted gender identity. Now, there's a problem straight off the bat. He alleges that the student took advantage of a policy passed in August to commit a rape, allegedly that took place in May. How in the world does a 14-year-old allegedly transgender student take advantage of a policy in May that hasn't been passed until August, because all the kids are, I know what's on the agenda of the school board, and in 5 months they're going to consider and pass this. So I'm just going to start using the bathroom here right now because I can take advantage of that policy. No, it couldn't possibly have happened that way, and no 14-year-old kid would try to do it. The suspect, accused of assaulting Smith's daughter, was later arrested, with the Daily Wire reporting that they were, again, Daily Wire, reporting that they were charged with 2 counts of, you know what, as a matter of fact, it's a morning show, bad stuff that he was charged with, and a serious attack alleged here. But again, questions about the outlets being used, and huge questions about the timing. Enormous questions about the timing. Amazing. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back here to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, I got to continue. I'm keyed up about this one. There's a little bit more in the Newsweek article I'm reading, but there are more such articles out there, and I'm trying to find where are the ones where they... there are other articles in which the details come from interviews with the father from the Daily Caller as opposed to the Daily Wire. And I've called that out already because I remember seeing it, but it's not, I don't think it appears in this article. But I think I remember which other articles I was reading. But now there's even more on them, too. So we'll read a little further. But continuing with this first article, I highlight the timing issue for you. The suspect accused of assaulting Smith's daughter was later arrested, right? The Daily Wire reported, and the charges filed. We can confirm a May 28th, 2021 case that involved a thorough 2-month-long investigation that was conducted to determine the facts of the case prior to arrest, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office said in a statement to Fox News, the other outlet of choice here. This case is still pending court proceedings. On October 7th, the sheriff's office confirmed that they arrested a 15-year-old boy on suspicion of sexual battery and abduction after he allegedly forced the victim into an empty classroom at Broad Run High School, held her against her will, and inappropriately touched her. The Loudoun County School Board has been contacted for comment. And that's the end of this article here. But that's the second alleged incident. How can you all expect us to trust you when on multiple occasions, i.e. more than one, you've failed to protect our students? Okay. Is this the same perpetrator? Maybe. We just don't know. But assuming it's true, at the very least, what you have here is, again, it's not great to attack other students. Obviously, nobody's defending that. Not great to attack them in empty classrooms. Also not great. One thing we do know is that empty classrooms aren't bathrooms. And remember, this is supposed to be, in order to get it on Fox News, in order to get it on the Daily Wire, in order to get it in the Daily Caller, it's got to be transgender student. Just like we told you, a transgender student is going to take advantage of the policy that didn't exist at the time anyway, and attack other students. And just like we told you, that our nightmare fantasy has come true, except that the one attack that did take place in the bathroom, we don't know anything about it except you say the kid was wearing a skirt somehow. Maybe, if the kid has a consistently, asserted gender identity as female, could have been wearing a skirt. Entirely possible. You're the only one who knows about that. Maybe you have inside information because it was your daughter involved, and we have to all, allow for that possibility. But nobody else is saying it. It's all it can only be based on you saying it. Now, by the way, I will remind everybody again the extremely sensitive nature of juvenile justice in the country in general, and the way the state treats it here, and most states treat it here, and everything is supposed to be held very closely. But I understand you're the victim or the father of the victim of the crime here, so you're less sensitive to the needs, let's say, of juvenile justice with respect to the perpetrator. You're not really interested in protecting his rights at this point, and I can understand that. But it leaves you with an unfair advantage, that you can turn the thing into something that will make it a national outrage, as opposed to, well, we're all outraged about rape culture on campus. That's true. And what's funny, of course, I guess, nothing's funny about it, but what's interesting about it is when liberals were saying we really have to address rape culture on campus, it's a very serious problem. Boys very frequently grow up in a culture that teaches them that even if it doesn't teach them that it's okay to do this to the girls, that it's something that they can possibly get away with. And liberals say we really need to address this. And conservatives say, no, we don't. It's an imaginary problem. You're crazy. You don't understand. That's just boys being boys or whatever. Crime's bad, but it's not, it was basically like critical race theory freak out before there was critical race theory. Instead of freaking out by saying, because my understanding of critical race theory is that it's all about saying that white people are at fault for everything. This was a critical gender theory, and there was such a thing, critical gender theory, by the way, and still is. And we don't discuss it on the show because we don't know what we're talking about any more than we do with critical race theory, and it's not in the news as much anymore. But it should be. You should hold it up alongside the critical race theory freak out, because for the longest time, conservatives thought that gender critical or critical gender study, I don't know what the actual name of the program of study was, or which order the words were in. But when they said we needed to do something about rape culture, you couldn't deny it fast enough. But if you can wrap it in transgender issues, suddenly the same people are like, we got to do something about this crisis on our campuses. It's outrageous because everywhere the transgender students are hiding in bathrooms and da-da-da-da. Okay. Fantasy, we understand that. One that'll resonate with people because they have the same psyche, basically, and that fantasy will resonate with them. But let me just point out that we are talking about two instances here, though we can now call multiple, so we can complain about having to drop our kids off and what Dr. Ziegler isn't doing on multiple occasions. But the second assault didn't happen in a bathroom. The first assault couldn't have happened as a result of the policy. The second assault happened after the policy was adopted. Now, there's actual license to be in those bathrooms, but allegedly this perpetrator doesn't, for some reason, take advantage of it. Once the policy is actually in place, the next assault takes place outside of the bathroom and contains no mention of skirt or manner of dress, by the way. So I would say you're on pretty shaky ground. Oh, multiple instances. How you got to resign. There's two instances. They may or may not be the same perpetrator. They didn't happen in bathrooms. They don't both include any reference to transgender issues at all. That's a pretty weak case. But yet, it's national. And I say it's national because yesterday there was I'll grab it. I'll find it somewhere. Yesterday, a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee for the confirmation of an appellate judge, and I think like West Coaster appellate judge nominee. And every Republican on the committee used time to press her, I think, on the issues of transgender students, and didn't you hear about what happened in Loudoun County and da-da-da, and aren't you ashamed that once in 2016 you said transgender students might have rights of some kind, and you want to revisit that? And what do you have to say? What do you say to the parents who all know that 10,000 bazillion transgender students have raped every girl in America just last week in the bathroom, wearing a skirt, maybe, I don't know. And it's become a national issue. Now, closer to home, in Virginia, this is how they launched the thing. I'll get to that in a second. I got a tweet thread about that one. But let me finish up the Newsweek article. Or did I finish? Yes, I did. Right. But there were some other Newsweek articles that I had read. Maybe this was the one I think that might put us on the record with the Daily Caller being involved. Owen Palmer, again, the next day, 10/14/21, Loudoun County officials address, quote, misinformation over school assaults. Officials in Loudoun County, Virginia, are rejecting suggestions of a cover-up surrounding an alleged sexual assault at a school by a student who reportedly went on to attack another victim months later. Loudoun County Sheriff's Office said they want to address the misinformation regarding an alleged attack at Stonebridge High School in Ashburn on May 28th, following recent media reports. Scott Smith, whose daughter was the alleged victim in the May 28th attack, claimed in an interview with the Daily Caller, it now says, that might be, and now that I think about it, maybe it's incorrect, but, and he meant the Daily Wire. The other story said it was definitely the Daily Wire and had a link. This one's not linked, and it says the Daily Caller, which, if a mistake, I guess we'll have to admit that it might be a mistake, but if it is a mistake, what a mistake, by the way, to just go, out of all the outlets I could have named, weird that the Daily Caller comes to mind as the place where this rumor took flight, as opposed to the Daily Wire. Now, the names are similar, but I mean, the problem is that the missions are similar too. And maybe it's just meant to be that confusing. Now we have two sources saying it, or maybe not. Or maybe he really did speak to both. Maybe there's a link later on. Let me continue on. Scott Smith, father of the alleged victim, claimed in an interview with the Daily Caller that she was attacked in the girls' bathroom by a student he described as a boy who wears a skirt. Okay. Smith was previously arrested at a Loudoun County School Board meeting on June 22nd. We know about that. That meeting was to discuss draft policy on transgender and non-binary students' rights. During the meeting, Superintendent Scott Ziegler said the school had no reports of any assaults occurring in their public bathrooms and that a predator transgender student or person simply does not exist. Smith said he became irate at the comments, knowing that his daughter had allegedly been assaulted just weeks beforehand. He accused the school of attempting to hide the attack so that they could continue to push the school's policy 8040, which was passed in August, not June, when to allow students to use their name and gender pronouns as well as locker rooms and bathrooms that correspond, again, to their, quote, consistently asserted gender identity. In their statement, Loudoun County Sheriff's Office said they were immediately made aware by officials at Stonebridge High School of the alleged attack on May 28th. No cover-up there. Following an investigation, a 14-year-old male was arrested on July 8th, on suspicion of 2 counts of, well, we'll give you the charge in this case, forcible sodomy, because it's right here. Anyway, the sheriff's office said they did not publicly reveal details about the arrest as the suspect and victim were familiar with each other. The investigation was complex, and a public announcement had the potential to identify a juvenile victim, and that's pretty strong. The suspect was later released from a juvenile detention facility and transferred to another school. So, okay, now that apparently establishes that it's the same suspect and there was a transfer. Fine. The student is then alleged to have attacked another victim at Broad Run High School on October 6th. This, so much, I think we've pretty much said is a likely possibility, though until we read this one, we hadn't had confirmation from the sheriff's office that it was the same perpetrator. But here, yes, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office did issue a press release detailing the arrest of the suspect the following day. No cover-up there. Stating that the now 15-year-old is accused of forcing the victim into an empty classroom, holding her against her will, and inappropriately touching her. The teen was charged with sexual battery and abduction and taken to the Loudoun County Juvenile Detention Center. The sheriff's office said that they issued a news release for that alleged attack at Broad Run High School as the investigation, quote, did not involve complex circumstances. The arrest was immediate, and the arrest was reported to the community as information released was unlikely to disclose the identity of the victim. During a heated Loudoun County School Board meeting on Tuesday, a number of parents demanded that Superintendent Scott Ziegler resign over the attacks and questioned why the student accused of the assault at Stonebridge High School was sent to Broad Run High School. In a statement to Newsweek, Loudoun County Public Schools said that under the requirements of Virginia's state code, state law here, division administrators can't investigate sexual assaults until involved law enforcement agencies have concluded their own investigations. Okay. The statement did confirm that the principal at Stonebridge High School reported the allegation of sexual assault immediately to police on May 28th, but their school board members were not aware of it until the recent media reports, as details of it were not made public. What were those recent media reports? Well, those were the reports of the Daily Wire and the Daily Caller. How convenient. LCPS is prohibited from disciplining any student without following the Title IX grievance process, which includes investigating complaints of sexual harassment and sexual assault. The statement said LCPS, Loudoun County Public Schools, does impose interim measures to protect the safety of students involved in the original incident and to deter retaliation and preserve the integrity of the investigation and resolution process, i.e. separate those kids from one another and leave the victim where they are and move the alleged perpetrator to another school, because you can't suspend him, you can't deny him an education while there's an investigation pending and he hasn't been convicted of anything. But we move him out of the school. It's a cover-up. You moved him like the Catholic priests. No, we moved the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator of this rape, out of the daily path of the alleged victim. What did you want him to do? Just leave him there? School board members are typically not given details of disciplinary matters. This doesn't matter, of course, by the way. There's people outside of the houses of the school board members saying, you knew, and you're evil for covering it up. You must resign now, or worse, we'll kill you. God knows what they're threatening these people with. And I don't know whether it's in any of these reports, but I've certainly seen others, and I've heard personally about it, that, the school board, of course, getting letters like, well, I hope your daughter is raped. Of course people are going to do that to them. And meanwhile, why? Why do we hope their daughters are going to be raped? Well, because you participated in this cover-up. What cover-up? It was reported right away. The police investigated it right away. Well, you moved them, like transferred them around like Catholic priests in new parishes. No, we took the kid who was alleged to have raped this girl and let the girl live her life and move this other kid away. Get him out of here. Well, you should throw him in jail. Well, no, you can't. He's not convicted of anything. Well, you shouldn't let him back into school. He'll attack another student. He might, but we can't deny him schooling either. He's not convicted of anything. What else are you going to do? I know, it's unsatisfactory. Parents are angry. They want somebody to punch the kid in the face and throw him off a cliff. Can't do it. I'm sorry. As much as you might want to. And then, well, it's a cover-up then. Well, no, it's not. Loudoun County School Board members are not aware of the specific details of this incident until it was reported in media outlets earlier this week. And now you have to wonder, why is everyone so hot under the collar? Does it have anything to do with the fact that the only people reporting this is the Daily Wire and the Daily Caller, who want more than anything for this to be a blow against expanding rights for transgender students? That's actually the end of this report of it. But by the way, it is illustrated with a photo at the end, captioned, protesters and activists hold signs as they stand outside a Loudoun County Public Schools board meeting in Ashburn, Virginia on October 12th, 2021. Loudoun County School Board meetings have become tense recently, with parents clashing with board members over transgender issues, the teaching of critical race theory, and COVID-19 mandates. Again, I remind you, it's because we're close to D.C. and because the concerned parents are full-time Republican operatives. And that's how they can launch the stuff into the discourse, and how the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire become aware of one of many incidents of violence in a Loudoun County school. Because look, we're making headway. We're gaining politically with our CRT protests and our COVID protests. Everyone's heard of Loudoun. I got a new one for you, and it's so juicy and right up your alley. Won't you take this story? Why, yes, we will. The picture, by the way, of all of 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 parents in the picture. 3 holding signs. Oh, I'm sorry. 4th holding a sign and facing the other direction here, but holding it at her hip with her hands crossed. The signs, the only one fully visible, cleverly designed with some words really big and in color, and then other words smaller, so that your eyes go to the big words. LCPS, crimes all prosecuted, is what jumps out of this one. The full text. LCPS conceals crimes. All colluders must be prosecuted. Collusion. Where have we heard that before? Who are the colluders in their mind? The school board members who didn't know anything about the attack and didn't cover anything up. You're colluders. How so? I don't know. You got to be prosecuted. I hope your daughter is raped. By the way, there's another one here, similar, and it's like, call the LCPS something concern crimes. It's blocked by the body of another protester. The other sign, the only other sign fully visible here, is Parents for Youngkin. The lawn sign, the yard sign. What's it doing there? I don't know. I'm just here in the middle of this protest for Youngkin. As a parent, as a concerned parent, I'm for Youngkin. Just weird coincidence, right? Well, anyway, let's see. Which others of these stories have I actually read? I think I saw this one too. Loudoun County teen put under electronic monitoring before transgender bathroom assault. I guess trying to show, well, you've been covering up and doing nothing about this kid that you knew was a problem. Different reporter here, Daniel Villarreal, 2 R's in that. So, Loudoun County, Virginia high school student identified police as a male and accused of assaulting a girl in the school bathroom while wearing a skirt. Not accused by that by the police, but rather of the dad talking to the weird national Republican outlets. Anyway, this kid was reportedly under court-ordered electronic monitoring for a previous assault charge when the bathroom incident occurred. So maybe this is his third. Clearly a problem child, but no pattern of the juicy stuff that made the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire interested. He's just fighting a lot. And I'm interested in the earliest assault, too. Maybe that's just a let boys be boys kind of a fight. It's unclear why the student was allowed back onto school property, as he had been previously charged with sexually assaulting another student on school grounds 5 months earlier. No. Here we have a problem. This has got the timing backwards, which is only making things worse. It was 5 months after the bathroom incident that this kid in another school was allegedly assaulted another student. So, I don't know. Is the allegation supposed to be that he was on a monitoring system in Broad Run when he attacked this second student in an empty classroom? In which case you would say, well, of course he was electronically monitored. They moved him from another school to keep him out of the path of the alleged victim of the rape, yes, but you don't just let him loose in Broad Run. You got to do something. You put an ankle monitor on him. Oh, they did? That's weird. What a bunch of irresponsible people. They better resign. The allegations of a transgender bathroom assault take place against the backdrop of protests by parents across Virginia against what they say are politically motivated policies of school administrators. Imagine that. They were elected and they're trying to implement policy, including policies accommodating transgender students. The protests promise to shape a close governor's race. What do you know? In which the Republican candidate, Glenn Youngkin, says he is taking the sides of largely right-wing parent agitators. In Loudoun County, the unnamed 15-year-old teen was accused last week of assault for allegedly forcing a victim into an empty classroom. So there's no third incident here. It's just we reported things backwards, and that made people think there was a third. Made me think there was a third one. Anyway, is there any more in this one that to clarify or make it worse? I don't think so. I'm wondering maybe over the weekend I'm going to read the Daily Wire interview and see if there's anything in the Daily Caller about it too and try and clarify that question. Now, I'm not going to do the lawfare thing, but what I am going to do next, still more on this. I put aside a thread the other day by your Twitter pal and mine, Greg Green, who's been keeping an eye on this for various reasons. And he has this to say. And then I think there's one more thread that I can add to this. He says, I haven't talked much about the Virginia governor's race or the effort to hitch the GOP nominee to organized right-wing harassment of public schools. A shoe I've expected has just dropped, though. a story the right has attempted to use as an October surprise turned out to be wildly misleading. Wow, how could it be misleading? Could it be in exactly the ways we just discussed? Well, yes. The story comes out of Loudoun County, a focal point of anti-critical race theory, encloses in quotes, protests over the summer. When I wrote about this for Melissa Ryan's newsletter, Melissa Ryan's newsletter, Control, Alt, Right, Delete, right? I think is the name of it. Anyway, and it's linked here. This is, though it appeared in Medium. Okay, so her Medium newsletter, but the other one she does, or maybe that's the title of her newsletter in Medium. The piece, he writes, How Critical Race Theory Ate Fox News. You know how. You understand it. He continues and says, the latest development comes via Jesse Singal, who you might know from Twitter or might hate from Twitter, I don't know, who cops to having been credulous of an explosive report in the Daily Wire about a sexual assault at a public school. And I guess linking to the Jesse Singal's piece in his newsletter, blockedandreported.org, police logs contradict some of the Daily Wire's reporting on the, what? I guess I'll open the piece. On the Loudoun County rape scandal. We've got some more details, Jesse has to say. So there you go. And I'll have to read those, but I don't think we'll have time to discuss it on the air. But maybe you'll want to read it. I'll give you the links. Oh, it's in Greg's thread here. Greg then continues, I had tried a few times to verify details of the case and had no luck. He doesn't even live in Loudoun County. I mean, he's in Virginia, but so he's watching. It turns out that Singal had no luck either, because the school, contrary to the right-wing narrative lofted by the Daily Wire, had made no attempt to block an investigation of the alleged case. What do you know? Here's a screen grab that he isolates from it. First call came in at about 1:30 p.m. This is the timeline that they're talking about. I don't have the time to read through it, but this is, I guess, the police logs that show that the timing isn't as presented. The timing of the explosive Loudoun County allegation and the messaging of Virginia Republicans and allied right-wing organizations, including Fox News, in recent weeks, made me suspect that the story was ginned up to bolster the GOP's chances. Here, illustrated with a link to a New York Times article, the unlikely issue shaping the Virginia governor's race, schools. Yeah, well, usually it's about, education and not school policy about transgenderism. Fox, in particular, has presented organized right-wing campaigns to stoke outrage at public schools as the work of concerned parents. Matt Gertz, not Gates, Gertz, writing about this earlier this month for Media Matters, linked herein as well. Whether the Loudoun story was concocted as an October surprise needs its own investigation, in my opinion. The effort to launder an unconfirmed and now apparently erroneous charge into the discourse to stoke transphobia, though, is atrocious. I'm appalled over it. More Media Matters links here, this time to right-wing media blame trans-inclusive policy for sexual assault in Virginia. It wasn't even in place at the time. Anyway, Greg continues, it's truly a gross spectacle and such an abuse of the reported victim in this case. As somebody else comments here, heartbroken for the girl that suffered a traumatic event and now has to relive it so Glenn Youngkin can stir up Trump voters without having to get his hands dirty. I mean, yes, somewhere along the line here is, honey, I know you were raped, but is it okay with you if I give details of the rape to the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire so that we can help Glenn Youngkin win a gubernatorial race here in Virginia and reverse the narrative that Republicans are on the decline because they're insane and believe stupid BS stories about everything and don't want anybody to get vaccinated and 750,000 Americans have died, but we can say, look over here. Is that cool? Can I do that with your rape? And I don't know whether the daughter said yes or no or whether she was even asked. But that doesn't feel very good to me. Also worth noting, Greg says, the QAnoning of Republican discourse has led the party and some of its candidates to very, very dark places. Here, a linked ad, I guess relevant to that, but I don't have time to go over the content of it. Greg's still going here. Sure, the GOP and its allies may as well draw upon some anti-Semitic tropes. Might as well while you're at it. Okie doke. Yes, that's true too. Glenn Youngkin quoted yesterday as blaming the parents' disagreements with the school boards in Virginia on George Soros and his money planting operatives on school boards, as opposed to their having been elected by their friends and neighbors, as most school boards actually are. And then he links to this other thread that I was thinking about from Jennifer Bendery, who writes in the HuffPost, about Republican senators who spent all of yesterday, hitching the misreported Loudoun County story to, of all things, a judicial nominations hearing. So I told you about that one, and we'll give you the link to that thread. Ginning up GOP voters by stoking transphobia is one way to get them out to the polls. It's hard to see it as coincidence that GOP senators weirdly made the Loudoun County story the focus of a hearing for a nominee for a California-based court seat. A wise conclusion to Greg's very interesting, Greg Green's Twitter thread on the subject. And I think he's exactly right. He's nailed it there. Jennifer Bendery also was a little bit credulous over how this one issue from Loudoun County, Virginia, ended up dominating this hearing for a judge in California. But, you know, all those Loudoun County concerned parents work for all of these senators who were holding this hearing and told them this news and said, we think this is a way out from voters blaming us for continuing to kill millions upon millions of people around the world with coronavirus, not to mention the 750,000 of our own.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, time well spent. I think this is going to blow up even more now that the weekend has arrived. But first, you'll want to hear about many other subjects that I haven't touched on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next. Definitely going to be focusing on Steve Bannon. No shortage of that. Plus more from around the country and around the world. Next. We'll see you next week.